You might remember I mentioned a type of bond just a few minutes ago known as a callable bond, and we'll cover those next. Some of you might be familiar with what that means, but some of you have probably never heard of that. What is a callable bond? How is it different from the bonds that we've looked at so far? Well, if a bond is callable, all that means is that the issuer of that bond has the opportunity to refinance their bond and pay it off early on certain predetermined days. Well, that's not much clearer of an explanation. The issuer has the opportunity to refinance their bond. What does that even mean? Well, anytime you're thinking about a callable bond or any bond, remember, a bond is just a loan, just like the loans that you or I take out. A callable bond is simply a refinanceable loan. Well, we have refinanceable loans in our lives, right? So how do we think about those? Let's think about it like a mortgage. Say you're going to buy a house, and you need $250,000 to do it. You shop around, you find that Bank A is going to offer you the best rate on a $250,000 mortgage at 6%. That's the best you can find. So you take out that mortgage, you go buy your house, you're happy. 6 months later, let's say Bank B down the street is willing to offer you a similar $250,000 mortgage at 4%. What are you probably likely going to do in that situation? Probably want to refinance and get that lower rate. How would you or I do that? We'd go down to Bank B, take out a new $250,000 loan at 4%, and use that money to pay off our original loan at Bank A. You're still on the hook for the same amount of dollars. That hasn't changed. The only difference is now instead of paying 6% in interest, you're paying 4%. That's how you or I would refinance a loan in our lives. With these bonds, when you buy a bond, you're simply on the other side of the table now. You're not borrowing money, you're lending money. In this case, to a U.S. government agency. And just like we have the ability to refinance some loans in our lives, there are certain bonds where these U.S. government agencies have the ability to refinance as well. So that's the concept behind that. A callable bond is simply a refinanceable loan. So that's how they kind of work conceptually. And we'll take a look at some examples to see how they actually function. We'll start with just a very basic, typical callable bond. We're still working with a 2-year bond here, as we can see, 4/15/15 to 4/15/17. The layout is pretty much exactly the same as the non-callable bonds we've looked at so far. We're paying $1 million to purchase the bond. Semi-annual interest payments 1%. We're going to receive $5,000 every 6 months and get $1 million back at maturity. The only difference is now, on 4/15/16, the issuer, let's say it's Federal Home Loan Bank, Federal Home Loan Bank has the opportunity to call this bond or refinance their loan. What goes into that decision for them? On 4/15/16, 1 year has passed. This bond has 1 year left until maturity. It's a 1-year bond. On that day, Federal Home Loan Bank is going to say, what rate can we issue a new 1-year bond at? And if they can issue a new 1-year bond at a rate less than the 1% that they're currently paying, they'll issue that new bond and use the proceeds from that to pay off these bondholders. If on 4/15/16, 1-year interest rates are at 1% or above 1%, they'll simply allow the bond to go to maturity. Now, you or I would never refinance a 6% loan at 8% or even at 6%. You only refinance if you can do it at a lower rate. And these agencies think exactly the same way. They want to lower the rate of interest they're paying just like you or I would. Well, that's the decision that they make. How does it work for the investor if you buy one of these bonds? Let's say you bought this bond on 4/15/15 for $1 million. It's now 4/15/16, and let's say 1-year interest rates are 0.5%. That means Federal Home Loan Bank is going to say, would we rather continue to pay 1% or $10,000 on our current loan, or issue a new bond at 0.5% and pay only $5,000 over that 1 year and pay off our 1% loan? Would you guys rather pay $10,000 a year in interest or $5,000? $5,000. In that case, Federal Home Loan Bank calls this bond, You as the investor get your $1 million back on 4/15/16 instead of 4/15/17. That's got to be a good thing, right? You thought when you bought this bond, you were going to have to give your $1 million up for 2 years to get a 1% yield. But instead, it's 4/15/16, only 1 year has passed, and you got your $1 million back and still got a 1% yield. Is that good if your bond gets called there? Unfortunately, there is no yes or no answer to that question. The real answer to the question is it depends. Whether or not your bond getting called early is a good thing depends. And it largely depends on the rate at which you're able to reinvest those funds. What I mean by that is, let's say that when you bought this bond on 4/15/15, you wanted your $1 million back on or around 4/15/17 for some purpose. You just knew, I want this $1 million back in 2 years. Well, if your bond gets called on 4/15/16 and you get your $1 million back, when you go to reinvest for that second year, are you going to be reinvesting at 1%? No. You're going to be reinvesting at what? 0.5%. So the only way that Federal Home Loan Bank calls this bond is if 1-year interest rates are lower than the 1% that they're currently paying. In that instance, your bond gets called, you earned a 1% yield in year 1, but in year 2, you earned a yield less than 1%. When if the bond went to maturity, you would have earned 1%. In that case, the bond getting called before maturity is a bad thing. You got a lower yield than you expected to earn. If on 4/15/16 you were able to go back out and reinvest that $1 million for 2 years or 3 years and earn 1% or higher than 1%, then maybe it would be a good thing that your bond got called if you're able to reinvest it at a higher rate. But it's important to know that whether or not your bond getting called is a good thing largely depends on the rate at which you're able to reinvest those funds. That's an example of a bond that's callable one time. There are bonds out there that are callable more than once. Let's take a look at one of those. You can see we're still working with a 2-year bond here, 4/15/15 to 4/15/17. Still pretty much the same layout as the bonds we've looked at so far. You're paying $1 million to purchase the bond, 1% semi-annual interest payment. It's going to pay $5,000 every 6 months and $1 million back at maturity. The only difference is now, let's say this is another Federal Home Loan Bank bond. Federal Home Loan Bank has the opportunity to call this bond or refinance their loan every 6 months. On 10/15/15, 6 months have passed. This bond has 1.5 years left until maturity. Federal Home Loan Bank will say, what rate can we issue a new 1.5-year bond at? And if they can issue a new 1.5-year bond at a rate less than the 1% that they're currently paying, they'll issue that new bond, take those proceeds and pay off. They'll issue that new bond, take the proceeds and pay off their original bondholders. If on 10/15/15, 1.5-year interest rates are at 1% or above 1%, they'll wait 6 months. They've got another shot on 4/15/16. Now 1 year's passed. This bond has 1 year left until maturity. Federal Home Loan Bank will say, what rate can we issue a new 1-year bond at? They can issue a new 1-year bond at a rate less than the 1% that they're currently paying. They'll issue that new bond and use the proceeds to pay off these bondholders. If on 4/15/16, 1-year interest rates are at 1% or above 1%, they'll wait 6 months. They've got one more shot on 10/15/16. 1.5 years have now passed, and this bond has 6 months left until maturity. Federal Home Loan Bank will say, what rate can we issue a new 6-month bond at? If they can issue a new 6-month bond at a rate less than the 1% that they're currently paying, they'll issue that new bond and use the proceeds to pay off these bondholders. If not, the bond goes all the way to maturity on 4/15/17. You can see no matter how many opportunities the issuer has to call their bond or refinance their loan, they're simply making the exact same decision each time. Can we issue a new bond to the same maturity date at a rate less than what we're currently paying? If they can, they'll issue that new bond, pay their original bond off early. If not, they'll simply wait till their next opportunity. We looked at a bond that was callable one time. There are bonds that are callable every 6 months. There are bonds that are callable every 3 months or quarterly. That's a pretty common setup. There are also bonds that are callable every single day, so-called continuously callable bonds. But no matter how many opportunities the issuer has, they're simply making that same decision each time. Can we issue a new bond to the same maturity date at a rate less than what we're currently paying? All right, now that we've looked at a few different types of bonds and kind of got the gears working, we're going to do a little exercise. I'm going to take the institutional investment skills that you guys have been honing so far, and we're going to put them to the test. We're going to look at 3 bonds, and it's 3 bonds that we've already covered. I'm not going to spring anything new on you. We're going to look at 3 bonds, and I want you guys to tell me, just by a show of hands, which you think is the best deal of the 3. It's not a trick question. There is a right answer, so don't be afraid to stick your neck out there and answer. So I'll walk through the 3 bonds in question, and then we'll go through them a second time, and the second time through, just raise your hand if you think that bond is the best deal. We'll start with the bond on page 19. Callable every 6 months. Might get a 1% yield for just 6 months with this bond, but no matter what, you're probably not going to have to wait 2 years to get a 1% yield and get your $1 million back. Our second choice will be the bond on page 18. Callable in a year. Might get a 1% yield for just 1 year with this bond. Still a pretty good chance you're not going to have to wait the entire 2 years to get your $1 million back and earn a 1% yield. Our third choice will be the bond back on page 14, where you're going to pay that big old premium and your $1 million is locked up for 2 years to earn you a 1% yield. Those will be our 3 choices. We'll start back with the bond on page 19. Anybody think this bond will be the best? Callable every 6 months. Might get a 1% yield for just 6 months with this bond. Pretty good chance you're not waiting the whole 2 years. Anybody? Wow, this one's not very popular. Okay. About the bond on page 18. Callable in a year. Still a good chance you're not waiting the full 2 years to get a 1% yield. Anybody think this bond is the best deal? Wow, either everybody's napping or you guys are smarter than I am apparently. All right, our last choice then. Bond on page 14, got to pay that big old premium, and your $1 million is locked up for 2 years. Who thinks this bond is the best deal of the 3? All right, we've got a few. We've got a few who are abstaining. I don't know on what grounds, but that's all right. Anybody who thinks this bond is the best deal? I mean, obviously we have some folks with expensive taste if they like to buy things at a premium. Any of you guys want to tell me why you think this bond would be the best deal of the 3? It's a great answer. That's a very big part of the equation. If you guys couldn't hear him, he said this bond mitigates some risk because if your callable bond gets called and interest rates are lower and you have to reinvest at a lower rate, you're going to earn a lower rate once the bond got called. This bond, you know what rate you're getting, and that is exactly right. With this bond, we know that if you purchase it today and hold it until maturity, you're going to earn a 1% yield in each year that you held it. We also know that it does not matter that this bond is at a premium. That's not a bad thing. It simply means this bond has relatively oversized interest payments. But if you buy this bond today and hold it till maturity, you will receive a 1% yield for each year that you held the bond. That's certain. We know that. With the bond on page 18, sure, you're going to get a 1% yield for that first year, but we don't know what yield you're getting in year 2. It might be 1%, it might be less than 1%. There's a little more uncertainty there. The bond on page 19 has the most uncertainty of the 3. We don't know if you're getting a 1% yield for 6 months, a year and a half, or 2 years. Anytime we're talking about investments, what's another word for uncertainty? Risk. And anytime you take on additional risk in an investment, you should expect to be compensated with a higher yield. But the bond on page 19 is going to pay you 1% best case. The bond on page 18 is going to pay you 1% best case. And the bond on page 14 is going to pay you 1% best case. You're not getting any additional return for that added uncertainty that you're taking on. That, along with the mitigation of having to reinvest at a lower rate, is what makes this bond the best deal of the 3. Now, if this bond were yielding 1%, the bond on page 18 were yielding 1.2%, and the bond on page 19 were yielding 1.3%, then it's not as clear. It's not as obvious which one might be the best deal of the 3. And callable bonds are very popular among public entities because they usually are higher yielding. In our example here, they weren't, but in reality, callable bonds are higher yielding because you have that added uncertainty. You don't know exactly when you're going to get your money back. You know the maturity date, you won't get any later than that, but you could potentially have that money coming back in early and have to reinvest at a lower rate. That means you're usually compensated with a higher yield.